I'm Mary.
And I'm Katie, and this is the Housewife Did It.
Last Halloween edition.
Yee! If you were here Tuesday, you already know we're in costumes. But if not, we're in costumes. So,
Yeah.
a good week to check out our YouTube.
You ready to get started?
Yes. In case you
Okay,
missed it last time, I have limited range of motion in my mouth, but good news is I get to talk less this time.
Yes.
So,
And I have a lot of information, I feel like, so.
yay. I mean, I'll still engage, but
Yeah. Do you know anything about Jack Unterweger?
Just
Other than that he lived at the Cecil?
no, just the sex workers
Mm-hmm.
interest
Mm-hmm.
and something about pantyhose.
Okay. I was absolutely gobsmacked, I guess is the word I could use for what I learned about him, because I had not heard about him before we decided to do Cecil cases. So it's very interesting, and I will get started. Before I do, we have a content warning for sexual assault. But other than that, here we go. In December of 1974, 18-year-old Margaret Schaefer, originally from West Germany.
I swear to God, I thought you were about to say Rexburg, Idaho.
West Germany, was living in Austria. One night, her friend Barbara Schultz introduced Margaret to her partner in crime, Jack Unterweger.
Literal?
Barbara...
Literal partner in crime, or...
Yeah.
Okay.
At this moment, figurative.
Okay, got it.
But not for long. Barbara was a sex worker, but a couple of other details are unclear, so I'm not sure if Margaret was also a sex worker, and I'm not entirely sure what Barbara and Jack's relationship was. I saw them referred to as a couple, but I'm not sure if that meant a couple as in a set of two people or a romantic couple. Also, though, I think it's important to note that sex work is legal in Austria and has been for a very long time. It has certain regulations to it that basically allow sex workers to operate as business owners. So it's a different vibe from when sex workers are killed.
Yeah.
In the U.S. because they're not seen as criminals.
Yeah, so we have to clean slate when we think about it, because it's here. Yeah, we think of that as such a high risk.
Right, it's dangerous.
And, underground. Kind of course they've been killed and
right.
Whatever. Yeah.
So Barbara and Jack lured Margaret into the nearby woods, where they tied her up and began to sexually assault her. Jack then attempted to demand that Margaret have sex with him, and she refused. At this, he became enraged and beat Margaret with a steel pipe before he wrapped Margaret's own bra around her neck and strangled her with it. He claimed that as he was doing so, he saw her face morph into that of his mother. Jack's mother, Theresia Unterweger, was a Viennese barmaid and waitress when she met Jack's father, Jack Becker, in Trieste, Italy.
Okay.
I don't know if that's correct. I thought you might know.
I don't.
He was an American soldier, and it's believed that he hired Theresia as a sex worker. While Theresia was pregnant with baby Jack, she was arrested for fraud. She was released to Graz, Austria, and gave birth to Johann Jack Unterweger on August 16th, 1950. She was arrested again in Judenburg, Styria, Austria in 1953, and Jack was sent to live with his grandfather in a one-room cabin. Jack alleges that his grandfather regularly used him as a pawn to help him steal farm animals.
Okay.
He was generally regarded as a difficult guardian for Jack to have lived with. However, some reports indicate that it's possible this narrative of Jack's grandfather was entirely made up by Jack to gain sympathy and prove that he simply had no choice in life but to become the worst society could offer.
Yeah, I was gonna say though, Of all the things, of all the bad childhoods we've heard, a pawn to steal farm animals is not even
Yeah, not
close.
the worst. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Other reports claim that Jack's grandfather worked as a basket weaver and likely generally just left Jack alone. It's believed that when Jack says he saw the face of his mother and Margaret as he was killing her, it was because Jack had always hated his mother and felt the same form of hate for Margaret in that moment. He was quickly arrested, and in 1976, the court sentenced him to life in prison. This was not Jack's first run-in with the law by any means. It's also speculated that it wasn't his first murder. In 1974, a sex worker named Marcia Horvath disappeared. An eyewitness claims that she had seen Marcia with Jack and had even seen him strangle her.
whoa!
The witness claims that Jack held Marcia's bra around her neck until she became unconscious, but that she was still alive after the ordeal. However, she claims that she then saw Jack wrap Marcia up and load her into a car. By the time Marcia's body was found in Lake Salzashi, near Salzburg, he was already in prison for Margaret's murder and was never charged or convicted for Marcia's drowning.
Girl!
Yeah.
Okay.
Jack began getting into legal trouble at an early age. Between 1966 and 1974, he was convicted 16 times. Most of the convictions were theft-related, but some were also for pimping and one sexual assault of a sex worker. While sex work is legal in Austria, pimping is not.
Which is good, right?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, so the reasoning is that pimping promotes a type of dependency and a possibility for human trafficking that puts sex workers into danger.
Which, like you said, they were treated like entrepreneur, like self-employed.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there would be no purpose for
Yeah.
pimps.
The legal parameters are that sex workers must be self-employed and must pay taxes in order to operate in Austria legally. When asked about being a pimp, Jack said, quote, "I wielded my steel rod among the prostitutes of Hamburg, Munich, and Marseille. I had enemies and conquered them through my inner hatred," end quote.
Okay.
Jack was in and out of prison for most of the 8 years between him being 16 and 24 years old. This time was different, though. While in Stein prison, Jack learned to read and write and began to become very good at it. He had gone into prison illiterate, but now he wrote plays, poetry, short stories, and novels. He wrote autobiographies as a way to get his feelings out. His book, Endstation Zuchthaus, or Terminal Prison, won an Austrian Literary Prize in 1984.
From in prison?
Yeah.
Wow.
And Fegefjord, or Purgatory, became a bestseller, was made into a successful film, and was even taught in Austrian schools. His plays were performed around Austria. In his writing, Jack would claim that he was a victim of circumstance, and that if his childhood had been better, he never would have ended up this way. Jack seemed to believe that if he could become good enough to convince people of that, maybe they would let him go.
Yeah.
And this seemed to work because people began to feel pity for him. The people of Austria were trying to be open-minded and believed that they were working with the best of intentions.
It's like so weird to become like the poster child for like prison being like good for you. Like,
right.
On the one hand, it's like I should get out of prison because look, I've been rehabilitated.
Yeah,
but on the other hand, it's like you wasn't shit until you was in prison,
Yeah.
so you should
Right.
stay there because
Maybe
it's
you
working
need
for
there.
you.
Yeah. Some people believe that Jack Unterweger was inspired by Jack Abbott. Jack Abbott was born on January 21st, 1944, on a U.S. Army base in Michigan to an American soldier and a Chinese immigrant. Similarly to Jack Unterweger, Jack Abbott regularly got into trouble as a child initially with teachers and eventually with the law, before being sent to a reform school. In 1965, 21-year-old Jack Abbott was arrested for forgery and was serving time in a Utah prison. During his time there, he stabbed a fellow inmate to death, and he received an additional sentence of 3 to 20 years. In 1971, he escaped prison and committed a bank robbery in Colorado, and once he was caught, he was given another 19 years. In 1977, though, Jack Abbott learned about Norman Mailer. At the time, Norman was writing about Gary Gilmore, a convicted murderer. Abbott wrote to Mailer and asked if he could be the subject of his writing, as Abbott was interested in writing about his experience in prison. Norman agreed, and together they wrote In the Belly of the Beast, which was made up of Abbott's letters to Mailer about the prison system's conditions. In 1980, Jack Abbott was up for parole, and backed by Norman Mailer, he was released. However, just 6 weeks later, Jack Abbott went to a small cafe called the Bennybon in Manhattan, where he had been living and soaking up the advantages of life in the literary community. He got up to use the restroom and was stopped by Richard Aiden, the 22-year-old son-in-law of the cafe's owner. Richard explained to Jack that the restroom was for staff only, as this was a very small cafe. Abbott stabbed Richard in the chest, killing him, and by January of 1982, he was back in prison, serving 15 years to life for manslaughter.
Gee, for manslaughter?
Mm-hmm.
He stabbed that man right in the chest.
Yeah, I think like second degree.
Yeah.
Murder?
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe they were thinking like it was like a heat of the moment thing, and he just was like,
or maybe he
didn't know
pled,
where he was going,
like
for,
made
but
some deal where he got it lowered. I don't know.
maybe, yeah. Despite the catastrophic events of Jack Abbott's release from prison in 1985, several Austrian writers and prison reform activists launched a campaign to pardon Unterweger and have him released from prison.
Great.
They claimed that he, quote, represented the great hope of intellectuals that through the verbalization of problems, you could somehow come to grips with them.
Ooh.
I'm not saying that you can't. But is that enough to release a murderer from prison?
He can come to grips with his problems all day long. That is great.
And then stay with them in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Jack's psychiatrist claimed that he was truly reformed and had learned to control his rage through reading and writing. The prison workers noted that he was calm and polite, and that was their greatest success story of reform. People were truly buying what he was selling, but the Austrian president at the time, Rudolf Kirchschlager, refused to sign the petition to pardon Jack. He pointed out that the court-mandated minimum for murder was 15 years in prison, and Jack had only served 9. Jack's supporters continued to fight for his release, and once his 15 years were up, Jack Unterweger was released on May 23, 1990. He was invited to host television programs, read at bookstores, and become a well-known advocate for criminal rehabilitation, citing himself as proof that anyone can change. He quickly became a journalist and began reporting on crime.
Nice.
That's who you want in charge of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Whatever.
Not everyone bought into the hype of forgiving a convicted murderer, though. The director of the Purgatory movie, remember that's one of his books, pointed out that Jack didn't actually care about his writing or the people he had met because of it, but was only using it as a way to look out for number one. He basically was saying, like, he doesn't write because he enjoys writing. Like, he writes because he's good at writing, and he thought it could get him out of prison.
Yeah.
A lawyer who had gotten to know Jack since his release noted that he was difficult to understand or even hold a conversation with, and that it seemed obvious that something was off with him. They also pointed out that Jack's obsession with death had not gone away. He wrote love poems for death, once writing, quote, You still seem strange in distance and lively, death, but one day you will be close and full of flames. Come, lover, I am there. Take me, I am yours. End quote.
Okay.
Not long after his release, some mysterious and somewhat familiar murders began.
Is this still in Austria?
On September 15th,
Okay.
I'll let you know when we're out of Austria.
Okay.
On September 15th, 1990, some residents of Czechoslovakia were walking around the Vltava River near Prague when they came across the nude body of Blanka Bakava. She was lying on her back, her legs were open, she had been covered with leaves, and a pair of gray stockings were tied around her neck. The previous night, fun-loving Blanka had gone out drinking with some friends in Wenceslas Square. Her friends left around 11:45 p.m., but Blanka stayed behind. She had been seen speaking to a white man who looked to be around 40, but that was the only lead the other bar patrons could provide. In early December of the same year, a local sex worker named Heide Marie Hammerer went missing. Her body was found on New Year's Eve in the woods outside of Graz. She had been discovered by hikers, and she was lying on her back covered in leaves. She appeared to have been redressed on the top half of her body and dragged through the woods. Her legs were left exposed, and a piece of her slip had been ripped off and shoved inside her mouth. She had been strangled with a pair of tights and had bruising around her wrists that indicated possible ligature marks. The only piece of evidence they found of their killer were several out-of-place pieces of red fibers left on her clothing. A few days later, another body was found in the woods in Bregenz. It would turn out to be that of a sex worker who had gone missing in October, Brunhild Masser. She was badly decomposed, so it was difficult to figure out exactly what had happened to her, but they were beginning to see a connection between all of the murdered women. On March 7th, 1991, the parents of 35-year-old Elfriede Schrimpf, another sex worker in the area, contacted police to let them know that a man had been calling their home to taunt them about their missing daughter. They were particularly concerned because their phone number was not listed, so they believed that the caller may be the person who had their daughter.
Oh, yeah.
This time she was just missing. On October 5th, 1991, Elfriede's skeletal remains were found in the woods just outside of Graz. Like the others, she was covered in leaves. Soon after, 4 more sex workers vanished from Vienna within a month. Sylvia Ziegler, 23, Sabine Moitzel, 25, Karin Eroglu-Sladky, 25, and Regina Prim, 32. All 4 bodies were again discovered in wooded areas, all reportedly strangled by their own bras, and Sabine and Karin weren't discovered until late May of 1992.
Just so, it always makes me wonder, did you want out of prison? Knowing,
right.
I want to get out so that I can kill more people? Or did you get out and just, an urge took over and you didn't know this was going to happen? It's just,
right.
If you're looking out for number one and you're I just want out, it doesn't seem like you would just be hee hee hee, let me go do it all in the same MO.
Right. It's I was going to say, it seemed like he wanted to get out just for the sake of being out of prison.
Right.
Which, you could argue, why would you want to throw it away? But, you took that risk in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that's how killers, work. But it's, so weird to me that you would just be yep, I'm going to do it exactly the same way I did it before.
Yeah. While sex workers in Austria were living in fear, Jack Unterweger was getting an opportunity that no convicted murderer had gotten before. In the summer of 1991, Jack was hired by the Los Angeles Times to write about crime in Southern California, specifically about Skid Row's red light district.
Wow.
When he arrived in LA, the LAPD gave him a ride around the area where he would do most of his research before he moved into the Cecil Hotel downtown.
And they at least knew that he killed one sex worker and that his mother was
Yeah.
a sex worker?
They were like, you know what you should report on?
Criminal
Sex work that's
sex work.
not protected
Yeah.
by law.
Yeah.
Yeah. On June 20th, just over a month after Jack moved to Los Angeles, the nude body of 35-year-old Shannon Exley was found in Boyle Heights, about 2 miles from the Cecil. Her bra was wrapped around her neck, and 7 different samples of DNA were found on her body. One did match Jack Unterweger, but with 6 other semen samples belonging to other men, there wasn't enough information on, like, who was the killer.
Yeah, would just prove he was in contact with her.
Right. On June 30th, another sex worker's body was found in the same area. 33-year-old Irene Rodriguez was found behind a tractor trailer, and she had also been strangled with her own bra. On July 10th, the body of 26-year-old sex worker Peggy Booth was found in a Malibu canyon. Like the other 2 LA victims, she had been strangled with her own bra. I also saw some reports that said the 3 victims were all beaten and that one had been penetrated by a tree branch, but I only found that in one source, so I'm not totally sure if that's true.
Would that be new for him, the beatings? That first lady.
I think he beat Margaret.
Okay.
He beat her with a steel pipe. Okay. During the 5 weeks that these murders were happening, Jack Unterweger was continuing his stay at the Cecil Hotel, which he later said was inspired by Richard Ramirez's stay in the 1980s, writing for the LA Times about these murdered sex workers. In one of his articles, he wrote, quote, "Real life in LA is dominated by a tough struggle for survival, by the broken dreams of thousands who come to the city and an equal number who leave, sometimes dead." End quote.
And is, like, that part of the motivation? Like, I'm creating fodder for myself to write about?
Right.
Like,
right.
I'll, like, keep myself in business, basically?
Right. It's crazy. Back in Austria, 70-year-old retired investigator August Schinner was trying to break the case of the women who had been murdered all in the same way. In June of 1991, the disappearances and murders stopped, but they still hadn't been able to find the culprit. As August reviewed the evidence in these cases, he was reminded of a case he had worked in the 70s. A sex worker had admitted to abducting an 18-year-old with an accomplice who had then strangled her with her own bra. The man who had been arrested for the murder was named Johann Unterweger, and August was sure he had committed the 7 murders in Austria as well. However, he remembered that Johann, also known as Jack, had received life in prison, so it couldn't have been possible for him to commit these murders.
See, that would be a sensible thought, sir. My friend August.
Wouldn't it just? Still, he couldn't let the hunch go. He looked into Jack Unterweger and found that he had been released just before the murders began.
Weird.
How about that? He was able to conclude that Jack was in the area of the crimes at the time when each of them was committed. This wouldn't be enough, though, as Jack had been reporting on the cases. So, like,
right.
Of course he was in the area.
Yeah.
He's a crime reporter. In October of 1991, once Jack was living in Austria again, Interpol and police in Graz began to surveil Jack Unterweger while also trying to gather the evidence they needed to prove that he had committed the 1990 and 1991 murders. On August 20th, they brought him in for questioning, and just as they suspected, he told them that he was at the scenes to conduct research for his writing, and that was the only type of interaction he had with any sex workers.
What a nice little
writing about them.
Explanation.
By February 1992, police finally had enough evidence to move forward with an arrest. When they arrived at Jack's home, however, he was gone.
What did they have?
I don't know, to be honest. This is a very difficult case to put together. I will not lie to you.
Yeah. I mean...
I don't know. I think that there was I think that there was some kind of DNA evidence that they were able to put together.
And the fact that he's
Jack
just
had
always fucking there.
Mm-hmm. Jack had fled the country with his 18-year-old girlfriend, Bianca Mrock, whom he had met at a wine bar where she was a waitress finishing up high school. She was starstruck that such a famous writer would take an interest in her, so when he told her he was running away, she gladly went with him.
Awesome.
Yep. Jack had been tipped off by friends. Dr. Ernst Geiger had been gathering evidence and was confident that Jack was not only a serial killer, but one who had been killing all over the world. Hair fragments from Blanka Bakova were found in Jack's car. And when searching Jack's flat, they found a red scarf that matched the red fibers found at the scene of Heide Marie Hammerer's murder. They also found a receipt from a Malibu seafood restaurant and photos of Jack with female members of the LAPD. Armed with the circumstantial evidence and the knowledge that Jack had at some point been in California, Dr. Geiger called the LAPD and gave them the information he had gathered. He learned that they were investigating the murders of 3 sex workers, which were almost identical to those in Austria. The murders had happened while Jack was living in the Cecil Hotel on Skid Row and had stopped once he had moved out of Los Angeles. Having lived in the Cecil was one of the things that caused Jack to rise to the top of the suspect list, as it was so close in distance to where the first 2 victims were found and where the women were working.
Yeah.
Police were now certain that Jack was responsible for the murders in both Austria and Los Angeles, and were getting more and more concerned about what might happen if they weren't able to find him, as his girlfriend was so young and was potentially in danger.
Do they think that that's where he's headed again, is LA?
I don't think they think he's headed to LA. Okay. But they figure out pretty quickly where he's headed.
Okay.
The 2 were traveling across... Oh, that came out weird. It's my crispy R. The 2 were traveling across Switzerland and France to evade police. Then they managed to escape from Europe to travel to Miami, Florida. They chose this city because of Bianca's interest in Miami Vice.
Oh, nice.
Bianca quickly got a job as a nude dancer in Miami and earned some money to begin purchasing the necessities they would need to continue their fugitive lifestyle in America. She purchased a mattress and a used typewriter for Jack. Then, Jack contacted the Austrian press in an attempt to convince them to publish a story proclaiming his innocence.
Okay.
He claimed he was a victim of police, being used as a scapegoat for these murders simply because they did not like him.
Yeah, okay.
Then he had Bianca chime in and tell the press that she willingly left with Jack and was very happy with him, and that it wasn't fair how he was being targeted.
Which, honestly, she probably believes that.
Yeah.
So...
The press coverage, coupled with the credit card receipts from Bianca's recent purchases on credit cards...
Awesome.
...allowed U.S. Marshals to pinpoint where Jack was, and in late February, he was arrested in Miami Beach and cried the whole drive to the courthouse.
Good.
According to the FBI Files episode on Jack Unterweger, FBI agents met them at the courthouse and offered Jack a choice.
Why?
He could be tried in the U.S., or he could be extradited back to Austria and tried there.
I guess those are fine choices.
Yeah. Either way, he would be tried for all of the murders, regardless of which country they took place in. Jack was concerned that if he were prosecuted in California, they may seek the death penalty, which Austria doesn't have. Neither does California.
Maybe in 1991?
Apparently. No, remember we learned it was in the 70s. This is the 90s.
Oh, yeah. Well.
He also felt like he had a better chance of convincing an Austrian jury that he was innocent because after all, he had convinced them once before that he was a changed man.
Yeah.
On May 27th, 1992, he was extradited back to Austria, where he was charged with 11 murders. Unfortunately for Jack, the Austrian public and the art community in particular did not feel the same openness they had for him after his first murder trial.
Yeah, about 7 times less.
Yeah. One lawyer warned Jack, quote, "If they conduct a DNA test, then the devil's going to catch you." End quote.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that means.
Well, I mean, it would scare me into being like, don't check for DNA.
Yeah. Okay. However, some people still did want to see the best in Jack. A talk show host who had befriended Jack upon his initial release from prison was quoted as saying, "If he was the killer, he would be one of the cases of the century. Statistically, the chance that I would know one of the cases of the century is so unlikely that therefore I think he is not guilty." End quote.
Wow.
The logic
I love that deductive
is
reasoning.
unbreakable.
Instead of saying, like, how cool is it that I thought that's where we were going, was that this person was going to be like, how cool that I know the murderer in the case of the century. But instead they're like, not super likely, so.
No, that's obviously not the case.
Not little old me. I wouldn't know a murderer.
Crazy. Jack's girlfriend, Bianca Mrock, told an interviewer, quote, "He couldn't have killed them. They weren't his type. Jack has such beautifully cared for hands. He can be very sweet with those hands. I can't imagine that he could have used those hands to kill someone."
Except that one lady that he definitely did kill.
Yeah, do you not remember when he, the one he was started out in prison for?
Yeah. And
Remember?
maybe he's not killing the ones that are his type. We don't know.
He keeps them around, like you,
Yeah.
who he's dating.
Yeah.
The trial began on April 20th, 1994, and lasted for 2 months. He was tried for both the European murders and the U.S. murders. In Austria in 1992, the jury did not have to be unanimous, but just needed a majority. The jury was told in court about how Jack had been identified by multiple sex workers. He was memorable because he had asked several of them if he could handcuff them. He was violent with them. He was sometimes impotent, and he would regularly wear a brown leather jacket that was later found inside his home. Possibly the most notable thing about him was the novelty license plate he invested in upon his 1990 release from prison. It read W. Jack 1 and had been seen at all of the crime scenes.
It gets way better than that orange car you tried to shame Richard Ramirez for.
I'm shaming him too.
Oh,
Hairs
my.
found at Blanca Bakova's crime scene matched Jack's DNA profile with 99.96% certainty. The prosecution also pointed out the uniqueness of the knots used in each of the murders. Finally, Jack did not have an alibi for any of the murders.
Yeah. Yeah, you have an explanation for why you ended up there shortly after.
Right.
But you don't have an explanation for where you were when it happened.
Right. At the closing arguments, Jack spoke on his own behalf, saying, quote, "I implore you, even if you are disgusted by Jack Unterweger's way of life, to think whether that's enough to say he doesn't deserve to live in freedom. I can't deal with this scientifically, not at all. I just don't get this DNA stuff. My brain developed gene bumps when I was studying." End quote.
Then someone else should be in charge here. What?
Then it can't be me because I don't understand DNA.
What?
Okay.
Gene bumps?
Okay.
Sir, but you understand gene bumps, apparently, and I don't know what that means.
Yeah. With a majority of 6-2, Jack Unterweger was found guilty of 9 murders, including all 3 from California. He was acquitted of 2 due to the decomposition of the bodies not giving a clear indication of what had happened to them. So I believe that would have been Brunhild Masser and Elfried Schrimpf. Brunhild, it said, was severely decomposed, and Elfried, what they found was skeletal remains.
Okay.
On June 29th, 1994, Jack Unterweger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and was sent to Graz Carlau Prison, a maximum security institution. At his conviction, he was quoted as saying, quote, "I was a rat. A primitive criminal who grunted rather than talked. An inveterate liar. The prosecutor is right. I consumed women rather than loved them. But I'm counting on my acquittal because I'm not the culprit. Your decision will not only affect me, but the real murderer, because he's laughing up his sleeve." End quote.
What? So what crimes are you guilty of? Because that sounded like a partial confession.
I don't understand.
And you're a liar.
Yeah. It really starts to sound like a confession when just 6 hours later, at 3:40 a.m., Jack Unterweger was found hanging from a curtain rod in his cell with the drawstring from his prison uniform around his neck.
Why would they give them drawstrings on their prison uniforms? Can someone...
Austria, what are you doing?
Why?
Yeah. Just 40 minutes prior, a guard had come to check on him and had found him sleeping soundly on his cot.
Likely story.
One of Jack's lawyers... sure you did. One of Jack's lawyers claimed Jack had told him every day during the trial that he would kill himself if found guilty, but no one believed him. He said, quote, "Every day he said to me, if I'm found guilty, I'll kill myself. I didn't believe him, but after the verdict, he looked completely deflated, like a sausage that had lost its stuffing."
Why? Can people stop with the metaphors and the similes and the stop?
It's giving Aaron B. comparing Eliza to a rare fig jam.
Yeah.
On his charcuterie board. If Unterweger was guilty, he was a sick man. Do you understand? To kill without a reason must be sick. Many medical experts talked to him, and they all said he was not insane, but they also said he wouldn't commit suicide. His victims were not people he knew, not girlfriends or acquaintances. He killed strangers, women he'd known for only 5 minutes, prostitutes. If he killed them, I mean. End quote.
You just said they didn't. They said he wouldn't kill himself, and he did. So, like, they don't know shit.
That's what he's saying.
Oh, okay.
He's like, well, they're saying that he did this, but they also said...
Oh, okay.
...that he wouldn't kill himself.
Yeah, I guess. Whatever.
Since his death, Jack Unterweger has continued to inspire the literary community. He gained notoriety as the Austrian Ripper and the Poet of Death. In 2015, the thriller film Jack was released. It was directed by Elizabeth Sharong and was considered to be a fictional retelling of the story of Jack Unterweger. His crimes were also covered in an episode of the FBI Files called Killer Abroad, and he was mentioned in the Netflix series Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel.
He got fame.
The end.
Good for him. I guess.
What a way to end it.
Yeah.
What a crazy...
Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
I'm sad to leave the Cecil. I mean, I'm not literally sad to leave the Cecil, but this line of continuity has been interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good work, Mary.
Yeah.
We'll be back in regular clothes with a not orange background.
Yeah.
And not talking about the Cecil next week.
Bye-bye Halloween.
Yeah. Happy Halloween.
Actually, our next episode comes out on Halloween.
So maybe we'll leave the orange background.
Yeah. Just for that one.
Yeah.
Do you know what you're gonna do for your first episode back to normal?
Yes. Should I tell them?
If you want to. You don't have to.
It's time for Sherry Papini.
Yay!
My friends. A nice little break from spooky, scary Cecil. Now it's time for stupid Sherry.
Yeah. Oh, Sherry.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Why are we just saying the same thing?
I was like waiting for you to say it because I didn't want to do that at the same time too.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I should probably go.
Yeah.
Because she's probably also waiting.
Follow us on all socials and YouTube at Housewife Did It Pod, Housewife singular.